Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Tuesday Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone had a great weekend. As you know, we kind of had an unusual format Friday due to the unfortunate events that occurred last week. Today we're going to go over a few different topics. The first thing I thought I'd briefly go over was a sports update. As football's fresh on a lot of people's minds, the NFL just completed their second week. And so what they do every year is the second Monday football games, they have two games on, which normally they just have one game on Monday Night Football. So they had two last night. So the Washington Commanders, in a really close, well-fought game, edged the Houston Texans 20-19. So, excuse me, I got the wrong team. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers edged the Houston Texans 20-19 in a really interesting game to view. The Bucs scored with, I think, 3 seconds left in the game or 6 seconds left to win the game. So the Bucs are now 2-0, and they've played two pretty decent teams on the road, so things are looking very favorable for them. They play the Jets this coming Sunday. And then the Houston Texans, who were the favorites in their division, they've played two pretty good teams, and they're 0-2, so we'll just have to see how they're doing. The late game was two West Coast teams. The Los Angeles Chargers went to 2-0. They defeated the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders are 1-1. So the Chargers are looking so far in the first 2 weeks like they're going to have a really good team this year. And the interesting thing in their division, they're in the division with the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been in the AFC Championship game 6 or 7 years in a row. They've really had a big run over there, and they've won their division a bunch of years in a row. Well, the Chiefs have started off 0-2, so it should be an interesting dogfight. So that's a football update. Baseball, really quick, is entering into the last 2 weeks of the season, give or take. And most of the races are still in doubt. The only race that's been settled, the Philadelphia Phillies are going to win their division. They're playing really well, and they have an insurmountable lead in the NL East. The other divisions are up for grabs right now. Who's the favorite? Well, that's hard to say. Milwaukee Brewers have the best record, I believe, in baseball, but they're a team of components more so than stars. So it'll be interesting to see if they become favorites or not. In the American League, the New York Yankees, the Toronto Blue Jays, and possibly the Seattle Mariners are probably the best teams at this point. But the American League's very close, so it should be interesting down the stretch, and looking forward to the playoffs. Switching over to real estate, a few things have happened since we spoke a few days ago. It looks pretty certain now that the interest rates, unless something unexpected happens, are going to have hopefully a couple of downward movements over the next 3 to 4 months, starting sometime in October. That's when the Federal Reserve meets. But it looks like, I don't want to say the word certain, but it looks like there's a high probability that that's going to take place. Hopefully the rates will go down to 6 or below when these several rated decreases take effect. And hopefully that's going to jumpstart the real estate business a little bit. It should be favorable both for buyers and sellers from a couple perspectives. For buyers, obviously, it makes things more affordable. So for somebody that was looking to spend X previously, now they can increase their budget a little bit if the interest rates go down. It'll also bring people out of the woodwork a little bit as purchasers who've been waiting on the sidelines because they either were hoping the interest rates went down or they just felt the interest rates were too high for them to locate a property that met their criteria in terms of amenities, price range, location, etc. So hopefully we're keeping our fingers crossed, but that's hopefully a good theme. From a seller perspective, it's good as well because obviously the more buyers that are out there and the more they can afford things, the better it is for sellers. What's proven a little bit harder to forecast over the past couple months is from a seller's perspective, it's gotten even more increasingly neighborhood specific. And what I mean by that is some areas really have a tremendous lack of inventory. For example, you hear me reference Hunters Creek a lot because I do a lot of business in the southwest part of town. And Hunters Creek is, again, at a low level of inventory. And just to give you an idea, Hunters Creek homes can range anywhere from 400 to 900,000. The greatest concentration of their homes typically is probably maybe 550 to 750. Presently, we have a home asking $599.9, and then I believe the next home from a price standpoint above that is $642.5. And if you're looking for a pool home of a 4-bedroom nature in one of the more popular areas of Hunters Creek, there's very little out there, especially if you're looking to stay under 600, there's just not much of a selection. So if you're a buyer and you want to look in that price point, your options are really limited. And so that's good news for sellers. There's other areas of Southwest Orlando that actually the properties are moving very slowly and they have an abundance of inventory. So it's really neighborhood specific. So as a potential purchaser or as a potential seller, you have to look at the neighborhood when you game plan your strategy. For example, buyers may have maybe, let's say, 3 or 4 neighborhoods that they're interested in that maybe are in school systems they're comfortable with and maybe in a price point that they can afford. And let's say when they're looking at these different neighborhoods, one neighborhood has an abundance of inventory and not a lot of movement of houses. Another neighborhood has a scarcity of inventory and the houses are moving fairly consistently. So in that situation, that particular buyer may start their search looking at the neighborhood with an abundance of inventory and not a lot of movement in properties being sold because they feel they'll have better opportunities, less competition, and they'll be able to generate a better value. But it really just depends. Everybody puts a different value on neighborhoods, not only reputation, but convenience. They look at schools, of course. They look at generally how the house is maintained or how the neighborhood is maintained in terms of the community overseeing it. They may look at, for the people that do more of a deep-seated thing, they may study more demographic information, for example, the education level of the neighborhood, the income, the average income in that neighborhood, et cetera. Everybody has different things that are important to them, and some people really dig deep for information. Other people keep it a little bit more basic. So it really just depends. As a seller, you have the same variables, but on the opposite side of the coin, in the sense that if you're in a neighborhood without a lot of inventory, the chances are you can be a little bit more aggressive in your pricing. What is still 125% true right now is strategically pricing your home is of paramount importance. When I go into most neighborhoods and I'm doing research, the neighborhoods where the houses are being overly optimistically priced, you see a lengthier time on the market. on an average basis. And that's telling you that A, properties are not moving in that neighborhood to the degree that people would like. And B, a lot of people are just over evaluating their home and they're sitting. And the same thing happens with the dreaded category from a realtor standpoint of for sale by owners. It was interesting this morning. When I have a little extra time during what I call my prospecting or seeking out new customers, some days I have little time to do that, and other days I have a little bit more time. Well, I had about an hour window this morning to focus on that. So I did some additional research, and I probably found about 6 or 8 homes that were a little interesting to me that I felt could obviously use my assistance. The thing with for sale by owners is a few things. What a for sale by owner means is they've chosen not to utilize a realtor's services. They don't want to list with a realtor. Usually, if I had to generalize, the reason that people don't want to use a realtor is, number one, they don't want to pay the real estate fees, because rightly or wrongly, they feel that realtors are overpaid. Number two, maybe they've had a bad experience with a real estate agent or two in the course of their experience in real estate, and so they just don't want to use a real estate agent. So I understand that, but I always use the analogy, if you sought a lawyer's services or you sought out a doctor's services, obviously you had a need for them. And let's say you had a bad experience in the past with a lawyer or a doctor, you're probably still going to need a lawyer or a doctor if you're seeking their services now. You're not going to go on LegalZoom in most cases and try to be your own attorney. They always say a lawyer's dumbest client is themselves. And certainly, if you have a medical potential issue, you're not going to try to self-diagnose and treat it. You're going to go to a doctor that can help you either get in better health or avoid a serious disease or ailment, whatever the case may be. But a lot of times with real estate agents, there's a certain segment of our population that generalize. So if they've had 1 or 2 bad experiences, then they assume that they just don't want to deal with anybody in that industry. And that's unfortunate, both from the consumer's point of view and the real estate agent's point of view. And, I have a lot of statistical data that I could share with people. And I do sometimes if I physically get in front of them and I go through the services that I offer and my whole approach to how I can help them. I show them that for the most part, their net in their pocket, meaning that their selling price minus whatever fees they pay, is going to be more if they utilize my services than if they try it on their own. Secondly, they're going to have a much higher success rate in terms of the house successfully selling of using my services than selling it on their own. I can tell you it's very rare that I don't sell my own listings. If I take a listing and don't sell it, then I'm very disappointed. And if that situation occurs, it's probably due to a couple things. I took a listing, maybe that I let the sellers price it higher than I wanted to, and maybe I didn't take a strong enough position about my pricing philosophy. 2, maybe that seller has not been overly cooperative in making sure the house shows well all the time, providing reasonable access to the home, things of that nature. Or lastly, maybe they've taken kind of a harsh position in negotiating and not followed all my recommendations. That doesn't happen much because when I give people guidance, advice, and recommendations, I usually have a lot of information backing up my opinion. So, the most sellers, when they see all the opinion I have, chat with me, get a better feel for my professionalism and expertise, tend to follow what I recommend to them. But, there's always exceptions. But to get back to the beginning of that premise, I talked with a few owners today via text, basically. I don't solicit people on the phone. There's a lot of agents that do, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as the for sale by owner is not on the do not call list. The reason that I don't solicit sellers is for a couple reasons. Number one, I know they probably are getting a bunch of calls from other agents, and they're probably sick of talking to realtors. Because obviously when somebody advertises a for sale by owner, then the real estate agent realizes their house is for sale and they don't have a realtor. So they tend to call them because that's probably the most direct way to try to reach out to a customer. I don't like doing that because, like I said, a lot of times they might feel harassed by an agent. A lot of times they really don't want to talk with you. It's like when I get a call for somebody selling insurance services, or they're selling solar services or whatever. They usually talk from a pre-recorded script, and I know they're in a telemarketing room. And anyway, I don't give their call that much credibility. So I don't talk with them. I politely say I'm not interested. And I know to a large degree that's what sellers say when they're talking to a real estate agent. Whether they tell them they're not interested in talking with a realtor, or they just let them drone on and then cut them off and say, well, thank you, but we're not interested right now, or we don't want to use a realtor. Or if we were using a realtor, I have a cousin who's a realtor. Or if I was going to use a realtor, I have a neighbor that's a realtor. There's all sorts of reasons why people may give. And while I may be able to theoretically show them that that's not their best option, I don't want to do that on an initial call with people. So I'll send them a nice professional text with a lot of information in a reasonably compact amount of space that I take. And then if the people are intrigued, they can call me for further information or or to get better insight into my background, my personality, my approach to the business, etc. I also tend to follow up with a direct mail piece to those folks that, again, highlight my credentials, my experience, and I send them useful information. And hopefully some of them will read it. I'm sure some of them will throw it in the trash, and that's just the cost of doing business. And, I'll periodically stay in touch with those people via additional text, but I'm not a nuisance. If I don't get a response within a reasonable amount of contacts, then I move on. A, I don't want to, bother the people, and B, I've got better things to do with my time as well. I don't want to beat a dead horse, so to speak. And, you have to have a thick skin when you're a real estate agent, because when you're soliciting people that are for sale by owners, you're probably going to get, you're going to be unsuccessful more than you're going to be successful. And a lot of times it takes patience and the fortitude to continue doing that. So anyway, that's how I handle it. But everybody has their own techniques for that. So to get back to what I started, so I had a couple people that responded to me, and they thanked me for reaching out, and they gave their situation in brief detail. And two of them said that they would work with an agent if the agent had a buyer, and they would pay a 1% fee. So I thanked them for that, and that was kind of how I left it off. I said, if I can help you in the future or you need additional assistance, please let me know, and I appreciate the compensation that you're offering. What I didn't say is that most professional agents that are skilled are not going to show too many properties that are only offering 1% compensation. because we all have to make a living. And at least in my case, I work hard. I spend a lot of time with my customers, and it's just not cost effective to me to work for 1%. So in our new era of real estate, with the new guidelines that went into effect in August of 2024, I basically have a couple options. Let's just say that one of those for sale by owners that contacted me and offered 1%, let's say one of my customers happened to reach out to me and ask me about that particular address. Periodically, I'll get a customer that'll ask me about a for sale by owner situation. So if I've already had communication with the seller and know what their compensation is, I have three options at that point. Number one, with the new laws, I can ask the buyer to contribute to the commission. So the seller is offering 1%. Maybe I ask the buyer to pay 1 or 1.5% of my fee, and the buyer may or may not choose to do that. I know most buyers that I work with, they value our services, but on the other hand, if they've bought and sold houses in the past, sometimes they think to themselves, well, why should I pay the realtor? Because in every case I've had before, whether I was a buyer or a seller, the seller paid the fee. So if this seller is not willing to pay a fee, then I'll move on and look at another property. But let's take a unique situation. Let's say that particular home, the buyer said, I'd like to compensate you, Marty, but we're stretching. We're spending all our out-of-pocket money to buy a house in this price range, so we just can't afford to pay you. However, we really want to look at that house. We'd really like you to help us because we trust you and you'll look out for our interest and can tell us the pros and cons and all the other things that we should look at. But if you're not able to show us that, which we understand because you have to make a living, we just want to let you know, we'll have to consider contacting that seller directly. And occasionally I'll get a buyer maybe in that scenario that'll contact the seller directly. But I can tell you most of the time, the buyers won't do that. There's always a minority of buyers that may want to buy that way, but they're not very common because when you're buying from a private owner, a couple things. Number one, you don't have a professional agent guiding you, letting you know the pitfalls of different things that could take place. Number two, in most cases, the private owner who's the seller is probably not as experienced in selling real estate, so it may not be a smooth transaction. And number three, you probably question more about how the price was arrived at. I usually find with for sale by owners, their houses are very often not properly priced. Many times they're overpriced, but occasionally they're underpriced too, just because they don't really understand the dynamics in putting together a pricing strategy. So, those sellers obviously are choosing to go that direction, and I respect that. As we always say, everybody has their own perspective. Everybody's going to look out for their own interest. So for a minority of sellers, that may work out. I can tell you statistically, though, there's far more sellers that sell privately that are unsuccessful than if a realtor is involved in the transaction. That's just a fact. It's not an opinion. But anyway, it's always interesting. I always enjoy some of my communications with for sale by owners because it keeps my skills sharp. And then sometimes I'll get different reasons why from sellers. And it's always interesting because sometimes I'll hear a reason that is something new to me. So you just never know. But anyway, I thought I'd share that with everybody. Otherwise, the last thing I was going to go over briefly is we touched on this last week, but kind of our society. I'm not going to make this about guns today or about the shootings we had. The only thing that I'll say regarding guns is Florida's Attorney General who was somebody who really, in my opinion, didn't have the credentials to become Attorney General, but was appointed by Governor DeSantis when Pam Bondi became President Trump's Attorney General. He came out with a proclamation today that because of the recent legal decisions in Florida, people that have a concealed weapons license can now carry a gun on their clothing in full view of everybody. So be on the lookout if you're walking down the street or maybe you're going into a restaurant and you see a person that's dining there or walking past you that's got a gun on their belt. I can tell you, for me, that scares the H out of me. And, I have a hard time determining that having more guns on the street is going to reduce gun violence. But that's me. That's all I'll say about that. Last, kind of as a related thing to both the real estate market and some of the societal things we're experiencing, the latest reports came out, and unemployment is at its highest rate for a while now. It was definitely lower during the last few years of the Biden administration. And our jobs creation was a lot lower last month than it had been. And so there's a lot of concern with the strength of the economy now, and if we're headed in. The two potential worst outcomes would be if we have a recession, and if prices continue at their higher level, especially in durable goods like groceries are the one that we see the most. That hits us every week, and I just go to the grocery store. And sometimes, believe it or not, I won't buy things if they're a certain price just because it's to me, the item's not worth that money, so I just won't buy it. Secondly, there's things that you're buying for the house maybe that might be big ticket items that could go up in price. The tariffs right now, there's still a gray area. Which tariffs are affecting us? Which tariffs haven't gone into effect yet? What happens if the Trump administration loses the tariff case in courts? Right now, it's kind of 50-50. From what I've been reading, if they lose the tariffs, then all the tariff money they've generated, they've got to repay at least 50% of that, which could be monies they're paying back that are unbudgeted. They're talking about possibly having the government shut down in less than 3 weeks. There's a lot of things of concern going on. And I would say, I know a lot of people that just say, I don't watch the news. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about the economy. And I understand that because a lot of that's kind of depressing. But on the flip side, do you want to put your head in the sand and just feel that you have no control, and if things get worse, they get worse? I am, by nature, I'm a pragmatist. What does that mean? Well, I look at things as they are in terms of my evaluation. I don't have a pessimistic attitude, and I don't have an optimistic attitude. I look at the facts, the direction, how our leaders are acting and what they're saying, and how do I think that's going to affect us, good or bad. For example, when President Trump was toward the end of his office, the first term, I was thrilled that we had a COVID vaccine. It put me a lot more at ease that I could get vaccinated against a disease, and I think it saved a lot of lives. So to me, that was it reduced my stress level quite a bit. On the other hand, when these tariffs went into effect, I thought they were a bad thing for the country. I've studied tariffs. For those of you that remember your history, the Taft-Hartley Act, I think it was around 1930, the after effects of that were just horrible. I mean, it just was a real negative for the United States. Tariffs by nature, especially when we're imposing these on our allies, they just create a lot of animosity. And I know a lot of Canadians are doing a lot less business in the United States. I know cities and states that border Canada, like Michigan, upstate New York, some of those cities have had dramatic business decreases this year. Other small businesses that import goods, it's really impacted their business a lot. They either have the choice of making less profit, not making sales at all, or passing these large increases on to their consumers. None of those are three good options for the average small business. So that's all for today. Hope everybody has a good rest of the week. Knock on wood, we've avoided these hurricanes so far. The latest two storms they're keeping an eye on, it doesn't appear they're going to impact Florida, so that's great news. So everybody stay hydrated. If you need real estate help, of course, feel free to contact me for questions, answers, consultation at 407-595-9700. And this is Marty Kaiser out.